Oh, thank you so much for coming on today. I know I know I said to you before we started recording, I am having endless conversations with females that they're not even two-way conversations. We're literally just asking questions to each other. What is it we should be eating? How do we fuel? Like rah, 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 rah. And I followed you on Instagram for a fair while, love all of your content. And I just thought, I know who I can get on to chat to around fueling for women. To start with, can you give us a bit of a background and like why you got into what you're doing?
So I'm a sports dietitian. I specialize at the moment in
Yeah.
HA, so hypothalamic amenorrhea, which I know you're very much an expert into. And I have clinical experience working in eating disorders. So before I did my master's in sports nutrition, that was the space I was working in. I also have personal experience with that. So it's always been a topic very close to home. And I really saw like during my master's, seeing like how common and normalized disordered eating was within athletes and how, again, normal it was to lose your period. Also at that time, very little research on female hormones, particularly in the kind of like fitness space and how being a woman and that female physiology impacts things in relation to nutrition and also fueling. And so when I then went self-employed, I love sports nutrition and I also do love working with people to heal their relationships with food, but I'm definitely now kind of like niching the two of them together. So working with women who have very disordered relationships with food, with their body, also maybe are like in that active space wanting to support their performance. And so a lot of the work, as I always say HA recovery is very simple on paper, where it's eating more, moving less, resting a little bit more, reducing stress. But for 99% of my clients that come through my doors, or my virtual doors, they know what they need to do, but it's their brain working against them. So I would say, although we talk about nutrition and what they need to be eating and how they need to be supporting their lifestyle, a lot of it is really around like the psychoeducation and breaking down like fear foods and really unlearning like where this low self-esteem is actually coming out in food and why you want to control your body in a certain way and why you're meeting these needs through food and exercise rather than through other things in your life. So I'm sure a lot of my clients are like, why is my dietitian talking to me about like self-care and emotional regulation? But these are all like really foundation pieces in being able to change the way
100%.
you
It's
think and
exactly
see
why
yourself
I
and see
started the
food.
coaching. I felt like when I went through hypothalamic amenorrhea, there was a big gap between, okay, I could work with a medical professional and they will tell me what I need to do, but there's this whole psychological issue of, I guess, like patterns from childhood or like, and that's not because of my childhood. That's like media and everything like that when we're younger, consuming skinny, 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 and like having all of these food rules that, okay, but how do I get through that? And I felt like I could be that bridge between someone that's working through it from a medical perspective. So they know what they have to do. They've spoken to whoever, like medical professionals, they know what they need to do, but they need that hand holding support because I feel like you saying, it's so much bigger than just eat this, eat that. But I feel like, and do you agree that this isn't just for women with hypothalamic amenorrhea? I'm seeing this across the board. It seems to be that majority of women that I speak to have some kind of food rules, have some kind of funny relationship with food, whether that's leaning on the emotional eating to eat a lot when they're sad, or whether that's the restriction side, or whether that's just I don't know, just weird rules that we might have around food, certain foods for breakfast, or not allowed to do this after 6 p.m. It seems to be everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. I just feel like disordered eating is so normalized, but we're only calling it disordered eating now because like the kind of like years we grew up in, like it was again so normal for parents to be on diets like Atkins, cutting carbs, all of those kind of things. And I think thankfully we are talking about like the effects of it on physical and mental health a lot more now. But I would say most women definitely do. And that comes from like even I say like conditioning, but not in like necessarily a negative way. Okay, may have had like heroin chic in and that influenced body, ideals for a period of time. But even subtle things like your parents saying you have to finish your plate before you get ice cream. Like I'm now working with women who are in their 30s and 40s and have like that association with ice cream being a reward or like a moral value associated with things. So it might not always be like toxically ingrained in us that like we have to necessarily diet, but it's like really subtle cues that we pick up on. And I just feel like the lifestyle that we live at the minute, we are naturally so disembodied. Like I'm a dietitian. I, work a lot in the intuitive eating space as well. And I would say 99% of my meals are not eaten because I'm like intuitively hungry, or they're not eaten particularly like mindfully, because we live in an environment where I can't be like, sorry, Chloe, I'm hungry now. Like I'm on like hunger scale 4. I'm going to go take a break. Or like, I'm really stressed right now. I'm going to go book a massage. Like, we're suppressing so much of our needs throughout the day. And then naturally, like as humans, we're like designed to avoid discomfort. So we're going to be maybe seeking it through food, and that's how like all
And
these
what would
habits
some
kind
of the
of,
signs,
yeah,
like,
develop over time.
especially those signs that aren't the classic disordered eating signs? Because again, this is another conversation that I have all the time. Is like I will notice disordered thoughts within people, sometimes even myself, right? And they're not the classic of what I would have described as when I had disordered eating. So, for example, mine would be like previously, it would be like no carbs. I used to spit out chocolate. I used to eat a chocolate bar, spit it out. I used to only have carbohydrate, or like only have carbohydrates, or only have chocolate only after a massive training session. There was so many sort of like issues that I had around that were, I guess, very classic textbook. But what are some of the signs that someone has disordered eating that maybe aren't quite textbook, that, like you were saying then, like just sort of culturally being sort of developed with us?
I think like ones that you've just described are really common, particularly in people who have
Mhm.
kind of dabbled more in the restrictive eating.
Yeah.
So it might be like eating only with a teaspoon, or waiting until a certain level of hunger to justify eating. And that's a word I often use, is like feeling like things are a waste of calories if they didn't like hit the spot, or people delaying eating until they can actually sit down and enjoy the meal. And actually, you're then kind of like savoring and making a big deal out of food, when sometimes it is just about like ticking the box. And I think the other thing I come across all the time is women being like, I'm just a foodie. I love food. And it's like, I have to then restrict it. And I sometimes question, are you just
Yeah.
obsessed with food because you're restricting it? And like, because naturally, when we're telling ourselves we can't have something, we are going to think about it more. And that's another thing that I think is so common. Like, if your whole Instagram feed is like food the whole time, and you're not a full time chef and looking for recipes, are you like eating and enjoying things through other people because, again, it's something you're
Yeah,
not
that
like
whole
necessarily
mental
giving yourself
hunger,
permission to
like mental
have?
hunger
So that like,
yeah, I used to like
yeah,
literally watch
mental eating.
recipes and watch people eating all the time because of that, like, I guess,
Yeah.
yeah, mental hunger.
Yeah. And now like I couldn't think of anything worse. I don't want to watch that. But like at the time, it's you're so consumed with food. And I think that's the other thing, like you described, that earning mentality. Like, I can only have X if I've gone to the gym or if I've done something. And the other side of that is, does taking a rest day or not exercising make you feel anxious about food? Does it change the way in which you then approach nutrition? And that all stems down to, as well, is there like a moral value? Like, do you only give yourself permission to have chocolate if you've been productive, or you've had a good day, or you've been good or
But if
bad, or
someone
whatever it
was
might
trying to
be? So
maybe work
yeah,
out if
lots
they
of
had issues with food, is there something, like, I guess being aware of these thoughts, maybe writing them down, but is there anything that you would say to do, like suggest to someone with your clients?
one thing I talk about a lot is, you don't have to have a clinical eating
100%.
disorder to be worthy of support.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be that bad to seek some support. Like, I've had some clients who just come for like sports nutrition advice. And then I'll be picking up on little mentalities like this, and they don't actually realize that these were causing maybe them issues or harming their relationship with food. Because again, we've spoken about so normal. But I think if you do notice like any, I would say, emotions around food a lot of the time, like if it causes anxiety, if it's causing a lot of stress, if it's taking up a lot of headspace, it shouldn't. That's not what like normal and a healthy, balanced relationship with food should look like. Of course, we go through seasons where like we might need to focus on meal prepping and supporting ourselves a little bit more. But it again, like the I always get clients to think, if the opposite didn't happen, if like you
Okay.
didn't go to the gym, how would that make you feel in relation to food? And like trying to suss out, then, is that a rule? Is it a preference, or is there a negative intention behind this? So like, did I skip dessert because I genuinely feel full? Or did I skip dessert because I'm conditioned to think that's what I should be
Yeah,
doing, and I
okay.
feel
And I
deprived now
guess
that I've
it's
skipped
like,
it?
just talking on that, like skipping dessert, there's like that whole other area, isn't there, of people that feel like they can't. So like when people feel out of control when it comes to eating, like that they can't, I don't know, if there's a packet of biscuits in the house, that's it, they've gone. That's like a whole sort of, it's the same, isn't it? Just different end of it.
Yeah. And I very often see that stemming from, again, I always say, like, people are using food to numb or suppress or deal with emotions. And that either looks like restricting it because you feel stressed and out of control, so you're going to control food, or it looks like numbing and soothing it through like eating food. But for somebody who's finding like they're so out of control when they eat certain things, or I love that phrase. Well, I don't love it, but it's common. People say, if I was to just eat intuitively or eat what I wanted, I would just eat like pizza, pasta, and ice cream all the time. And I always give the analogy of like, if you go to Italy for a week and eat nothing but pizza, pasta, and ice cream, I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to like a sprig of broccoli on my way home, because none of that is necessarily intuitive. That is just letting go of food rules and eating freely. And you have then a bit of a rebellion around these foods that you've maybe restricted or told yourself you can't have. And naturally, like, you have a child, I'm sure if you told your child, don't touch that red button, all they're
Absolutely.
going to want to do is touch that red button. So if you're telling yourself, I can't have chocolate, all of a sudden, all you're going to want and feel like is chocolate. And when you have it, because you've associated maybe with some negative kind of like moral stance that you shouldn't be doing it, you're either going to then go into like this loop of shame, beating yourself up. And that's either going to spark you to go, right, I may as well just eat all the biscuits and out all the like quote unquote bad
Yeah.
foods in the house to get them out to start fresh. And then you're in like that black, it's just a very black and white mindset and way
So
of thinking
moving
the
on
whole
to
time.
like sport, I guess probably majority of people I know, I don't know that have a lot of people that play sport that follow me, but I would say a lot of people that I know personally are CrossFitters. Very intense exercise, right? There's a whole other argument around why people do it. So obviously we've got do it for performance. We've also got a whole other bunch of people that will do it to be a certain shape, to be a certain size. You know, you can argue people are running away from other things, so then they try to exercise. But that's not what we're here for. We'll save that for another
We're talking
one.
about that
But
today.
how should CrossFit, I guess, people that train a lot, females, be eating? Because we are seeing so much of this huge rise in high intensity exercise, whether that's Ironmans, blooming triathlons, all of that. Yeah, everyone's out
Everyone's, yeah,
running,
running marathons.
but
Yeah.
I don't feel like every sorry, feel like I see such an increase in intensity and an increase in exercise, but I don't see any development or education that goes alongside that when it comes to recovery and nutrition.
No. And what I actually kind of worry about, I've spoken a lot recently, is this rise in the
Yeah.
normalization of endurance, like sports. Like doing an Ironman is no mean feat. Doing a marathon training is, again, no mean feat. And when you're doing that on top of a full-time job, and I don't mean to go into a whole debate on, you know, women and male roles, but typically women in these spaces are also carrying a very heavy mental load. And that whole stress load is a lot. But we're also seeing the kind of like rise in skinny culture coming back too. So I've got so many people who are like, I want to fuel to do this, but I don't want to be bulky and I don't want to, like, I still want to be able to fit into that dress. And I'm like,
Yeah,
these two are not going to
yeah,
go
yeah.
together.
And I think
Like,
it's like
sorry.
there's, like you say, this rise in skinny talk, but also I think people, there's a conflict of interest, right? Someone that loves doing this type of exercise might not like the way that that type of exercise presents in physically in their body. So then there's that element of, okay, well, I'm getting bigger maybe, so I'll just restrict some more and I'll just cut my calories a bit more so then I don't gain weight or I don't gain as much muscle. And then also there's people that have maybe never really exercised huge amounts or have no real awareness. Maybe they're on Monjaro or whatever that are coming into the CrossFit space and they have no idea how to fuel. Now, this is not, I am a big CrossFit lover. So there's no shade on CrossFit. But what I'm saying is like, I don't think that across the board, we're seeing this like huge rise of, like you say, like
No.
that endurance, people running like 2, 3, 4 marathons a year. And you're like, our bodies aren't designed to do this for an athlete, like but dedicates their life to this, let alone, like you say, someone that's maybe a mum or working full time or whatever.
And that's the difference. Like, athletes are, that's their full-time job. They can manage stress outside of it. But when you're running a marathon, this is not to say you can't do it and shouldn't do it. And I've done it, but doing it on top of an already very stressful life, it just puts so much more of an emphasis on your nutrition being on point, on your sleep being on point, on your stress management being on point. And like you said,
Yeah.
there's just not enough conversation around that. with the normalization of it now. Like
It
everyone's
feels
doing
like
one. It's not
yeah,
that big
it
of a deal.
feels
It
like the
bloody is.
exercise is, like, right down the road, maybe in, like, sort of, like, chapter 20, and the nutrition and how to sustain that lifestyle is on, like, chapter 2, and the nutrition can't catch up. So, say I'm
Yeah.
someone that's like,
Yeah.
I love CrossFit or I love marathon training. I know probably each will be slightly different in terms of nutrition, but I'm someone that just loves intense exercise and I wanna do it sort of 5, 6 times a week. What should I be eating specifically as a female?
I think you need to let go of what we were conditioned with the whole men need
Yeah.
2,000 calories, women need 1,800 because most women that I work with that train intensely need a lot more than the 2,000 calorie mark. And yet there's going back to fears, there's conditioned beliefs that we shouldn't be having much more of that. You're also going to be eating differently to what the normal, I suppose, like balanced, healthy eating advice is. And I have a lot of issues with that anyway, not just for like sports, people in the sports area, but a lot of that is aimed towards like weight loss, weight management, which again doesn't necessarily apply to everybody. Yet it's always the people I think with vulnerable
So
relationships with
why
food
would
that
someone need
obsess
to
over that
eat
a little bit
more
too much.
than that? And also, why would they need to stray away from that sort of balanced plate? Okay.
You're going to need a lot more carbs, probably quite a bit more protein. And we're definitely going to be needing to have a lot more fats. Bulking up on, like, if you look at like the healthy eating advice, which is maybe for half your plate to be fruit and veg and a quarter of it to be kind of carbohydrates, you're not going to be meeting your carbohydrate requirements for somebody who is active by doing that. We also have a lot of like negative conversations around snacking. And actually, like, that is really important, particularly for females who are active from an energy distribution perspective, and that impacting your overall energy availability, which impacts our hormones. So it's like
Yeah.
overall energy intake needs to go up, which I think a lot of women have resistance around, but also like that distribution of the energy and the types of foods you're eating. Eating more fruit and veg is not going to be meeting those needs. We need to make friends with carbs. We need to be like, your brain alone requires the equivalent of 8 slices of bread per day in glucose, and that's just your brain. Like, so you being an active human on top of that, you're going to need a lot more slices of bread equivalents in carbs. And I think, again, then that narrative around like, well, processed carbs, they actually really do have a good place in somebody who does a lot of CrossFit or like running, because it's a lot harder to meet your carbohydrate recommendations. Some people could need 400 to 600 grams of carbs a day. And that's really hard to
How
get
does
from just
someone know
potatoes
what
or
their
just,
carbohydrate
you know.
recommendation is?
So it all comes down to, again, I think people obsess around like, I'm not moving much this day, so I need to eat less. But I always tell clients, your recommendations and your requirements are based up by your life, based on your lifestyle. So if you're someone that's training 4 to 6 times a week, I would say that's at relatively high intensity. You have a high training load and training volume. You're going to be needing like 3, 4, 6
Right.
grams of carbohydrates per kilogram per day. So the recommendations are there. Again, a lot of people can go off on Google, like, how many calories or nutrients do I need? But I would always say we need to also base it on feedback, because you're not a textbook, you're not an equation. So when I work with clients and I'm like, I don't think this is enough carbs, even in the back of my mind, if I have like what we should be aiming for, some people might require a lot more from that. Some people might be functioning a lot better with just having a bumped up amount. So I always get clients to like, tell me about the feedback you're getting. Are you still hungry? Feeling energized? Are you sleeping better? Is your digestion better? They're all signs to us that we're fueling ourselves well. And it shouldn't be fixated on numbers, because I think that, again, kind of feeds
Absolutely.
into
And
the
like,
disordered
there's
mentality
so
too.
many
And that's
calorie
not normal.
calculators online now, aren't there? But you could type it in and, my mum, right, she's not a CrossFit athlete, but she does CrossFit four times a week, I think. And obviously it's all relative to uh, everyone, isn't it? So for her, that's high intensity training still, whether she's lifting half my weight or double my weight, it's still intense for her.
Yeah.
Yet she could go on a calorie calculator and it will come back and say, oh, based on your activity level and based off your height, your age, your gender, you need to be eating 1,700 calories.
Yeah. And imagine if she's just gone for training 1 or 2 times a week to now 4. That's a very big jump in energy demands and energy requirements that she's then going to need to be fueling for. And if she's then basing it on this kind of information, which might have been more or less than what she was previously having, that again might not match that that current demand. Like, and there's so many things to be thinking about. Like if someone's in low energy availability, if someone doesn't have their period, like there are other factors that are going to influence your overall energy requirements. You and I could do the exact same style of training, weigh the same, eat the same, and that's going to be
Yeah.
enough for one of us and maybe not enough for the other. And that's the other thing with calorie tracking. Like they're all based on equations. And when you eat, you have no idea. Dietary induced thermogenesis
What's
makes up
that?
10 to
Explain.
15% of our total energy like expenditure. So that is the cost of digestion ultimately. I always say it's kind of like paying tax. So when you like you get your pay and then it's actually what you get at the net when the tax is taken away. So if you're eating 200 calories, you
Yes.
might only be absorbing
Which
180 of that, depending on the food type. So
Yeah,
like
and I
calorie
read
tracking apps don't
something,
account
I
for any
think
of
it was
that.
a research study thing, which I'm no expert in reading research studies, but I read one that said something about like the difference between if you consume ground almonds versus whole yeah, or like versus almond,
Yeah,
yeah, and
versus
the
almond
amount that
butter.
you actually consume versus like if you ate a whole almond, all of like it takes so long to digest, you're probably not going to be digesting all of it. Whereas if you ate like almond butter, it's just like straight done.
Yeah, so you're gonna absorb more from, like, things that are maybe pre-digested versus
Yeah.
something that takes a lot more, like, breaking down and, like, digestion, as you said. But then compare that to somebody who's a healthy individual versus somebody who's been on a really restricted diet. Very often, when you've been chronically underfueled, your digestion slows down, and a lot of that is because it costs energy to run. But also, there's a lot of research that suggested there's your body is trying to hold on to food a lot longer to maximize how
So
much
when
energy
we're
it can
looking
actually
so when
absorb
we're
from it
talking about
too.
digestion, I guess this also would touch on the topic of bloating, right? So if someone's doing a lot of intense
Yeah.
exercise and also suffers from bloating, is there a connection and what would that connection be?
I would
Okay.
be questioning if you're underfueled.
Okay.
I think you're very stressed. So a lot of people are like very
Yeah.
fast to blame like bread or pasta or whatever it might be. Also, really important to remember bloating immediately after a meal might not be related to that meal you've just had. It could be related to something
Okay.
that's taken longer to digest that you've had previously. Of course, there are in situations where individuals are more sensitive to certain things, but for a lot of like bloating, our gut and our brain are really well connected. And so what's going on in our head can affect like our digestion. If you've ever had like a runny tummy when you're anxious or gotten really constipated when you're stressed, that's an example of like how our gut brain axis is kind of like communicating to each other. And for again, most clients that come through my door, they're experiencing a lot of bloating, and that is very often a side effect of underfueling because your body is ultimately made of all of these different systems. You've got your thermoregulation system, which is what regulates your body temperature, your gastrointestinal system, your immune system, and you've got then your reproductive system. And when your body doesn't have enough energy to support the cost of all of the internal physiological functions, plus all of these systems, plus your output and your exercise, it's going to prioritize the cost of those essential things like keeping your heart and brain functioning, but and also movement as well, because would have been a survival mechanism. And all these other systems get downregulated. So a very common side effect when people don't have a period is they're also really struggling with bloating, really struggling with like constipation, like digestion has just slowed down quite a lot, feeling cold all the time. Like they're
Okay.
all
So if
very
someone is
often
like,
connected.
okay, I suffer from bloating quite a bit and I do quite a bit of high intensity training, maybe I'm underfueling. What do they do? Where do they go? How do they
They definitely speaking to a dietitian or even speaking to like your GP, because like I said, there can be other things that contribute to bloating. For most of the people I work with, it's like you're eating too much fiber, you're trying to fill up on even like eating loads of like diet foods that are usually high in like artificial sweeteners or sugar alcohols, like they can contribute to bloating as well. So I would definitely like think about your diet and the balance of it. Are you getting enough carbs? Are you getting enough like fiber from carbs as well? Are you particularly stressed? Definitely speak to your GP,
Yeah.
and definitely
Because I
speak to
think
a
this is
dietitian.
like we're often always out for like blanket answers, aren't we? We're like, right, tell me what to eat, tell me, and I'll do it, and I'll do it. Like, no worries,
Yeah,
I'll stick to that, I'll stick to that. But it is so personal, isn't it? Yeah. And then I guess you add
and
in
so
like
nuanced.
these like psychological things around food and potentially having like a few food rules or disordered eating. And it's such a massive picture, isn't it?
But like you can, I very often have clients when they're challenging a fear food or food rule, they'll notice bloating. And it's because you're so stressed and in your head about eating that food before you've
Okay.
even
So
eaten it, like you've had that physical
how
reaction.
do people
But
become
like
like work through disordered eating and food rules and restricting?
So I typically, when I see somebody like assess, is this, are we underfueling intentionally or unintentionally? And I don't mean like anyone goes in deliberately, like to be like, I'm underfueling, but is there a body composition goal? Are we intentionally trying to diet? Are we also maybe coping with life through restricting foods or exercising in some way? Other people, it might just be an imbalance. And like you said, like not very educated. And it could be as simple as just like educating around their nutrition and energy needs, giving them some examples, and they go in like they're great. But again, most people, there's a whole mindset piece that's got to be worked through. And so I very often try to get clients to think about like, what is the function? What do you get out of restricting? And what are you scared of by eating more? Often there is like a fear of weight gain or a fear of losing control. And again, even deeper than that, it's probably not about weight gain. It's about what we've made that mean. And if you've got very low self-esteem, and if you've grown up kind of only associating your worth to what you look like or your achievements, then of course you're going to find it really hard to step away from, exercising in a certain way, or to give up this idea of like looking a certain way, or to be punishing yourself through exercise. So it's really trying to figure out, and again, everyone is so different. You can present with the same kind of disordered eating behaviors, but it
Yeah.
means different things to everybody. So it's really important to have like that individual approach and figure out like, what are you really afraid of and what is kind of like supporting these behaviors. And one of the foundation pieces I do with clients is really about looking at like their emotional regulation and self-care. Like, in what way are we turning to restriction to numb certain emotions or certain feelings? And then a lot of the clients I work with are really disembodied. Like, we don't know what emotions feel like. We don't know what hunger really feels like. And so a lot of that kind of initial step is some embodiment work, kind of like stepping in to figure out in what way are we, again, numbing and suppressing things by using food, and can we build up other coping strategies? And I always start with clients with really small changes to their nutrition so that they can build up evidence that what we thought was going to be the worst thing that could happen, like weight gain, didn't actually happen. And actually, in fact, that session when I had a banana before, it felt amazing. And I'm sleeping better because I'm eating earlier in the day.
Yeah.
And I'm going to the toilet once a day instead of like twice a week and having to use laxatives. And so when you get like those snippets of, I talk about evidence all the time with clients, like when you get so much more evidence against these initial feared foods and food rules, you can then kind of like start to make bigger steps and trust that that's actually going to be okay. But
Yeah,
the
I
first
love
step
the
is
fact, I
always
love it when
always the
I hear
hardest thing.
like a professional talk about something that I did. So I call it a proof bucket. So I started with literally every time I did something that was outside of my like classic routine to help me get to where I wanted to be, I would write it down in my notes section on my phone, a proof bucket. So like if I went and ate, one of the big things that I ate first was a muffin from a coffee shop in Totnes. And I remember it so clear because it was such a big moment for me where I ate it and I was like that A,
World's
that
still
tasted
spinning.
good, and B, I actually feel all right. Like that's it just tasted good, and then we went on with the day. And I wrote it in my notes, and that was probably one of the first things. And I thought, this actually feels good to be able to do this. So then it started to be like, instead of having 20 grams of oats in the morning, I was having 40 grams. And then after 40 grams, it then went up to 50 grams. And I would just write all of this. And every single time I would try to write something, either that something good that happened or just that just happened. Yeah, it was never like I
Even
didn't
just
try
like
to
neutral.
associate
Yeah.
something all the time. But what was key is I was able to develop this huge notes section that was just a proof bucket that actually these things aren't necessarily bad.
Yeah. Because I very often, like, if there's a client that's particularly fearful of doing something, I will go through, where did this belief come from? What is the evidence that we have for this belief at the moment, like from a personal perspective? Here's my neutral, nutrition based evidence for this. And this is an empty list of evidence that you're going to now create. If your brain is like looking for confirmation bias, of course, you're going to eat something and be like, oh my God, I'm bloated, or oh my God, that did cause weight gain, or whatever it might be. So it's really important that you go into that with like seeing this as an experiment. And sadly, all of this is exposure therapy in some form. There is no way through it without going through it, without starting with it. So Dance around. You can dance around and deconstruct these rules and beliefs and figure out where they came from all you want. That's not going to fix it. Like actually doing it
Yeah,
is
and I think
what's going to help you
that's
get
the
through
thing.
it.
I come across and chat to so many people through my DMs around people trying to seek more information. And at some point, like, you've got to
Yeah.
stop searching for information and just go through it. And I always say, you will not believe me until you do it. So that we can keep having this conversation, but until you do it, you literally won't believe me. Because there's
Yeah.
when like it's like when a friend tells you to like break up with an ex or whatever, you're not going to do it until you're fully ready to do it. And like it's exactly the same with food, isn't it, really? How do you work with clients? So like you come
Yeah.
obviously from like a
Yeah.
very like professional background where you're like, right, as someone, I'm using CrossFit as an example because I'm assuming a lot of CrossFit as we watch this. You're working with someone that does CrossFit 5 days a week. Maybe they suffer from bloating, or maybe they're not getting the performance they want or whatever. You say, right, we need to look at we need to increase your overall calories. We need to increase your overall carbohydrates, and we need to make sure you're eating regularly rather than sort of having long breaks. They go, no, because I'm meant to be eating, I've learned forever, 1,700 calories, can't eat over that. But carbs make you fat. Oh, and if you actually, I would rather save my calories till the end of the day. Oh, how on earth where do you start with that? Because you are fighting against someone's like potentially years of conditioning, right?
I say that to all my clients. I say, from the moment we start working together, I'm going to be teaching you a new language that you have never spoken before. And it is completely normal for you to like find it incredibly foreign, especially when everything like in today's day and age is sadly still so disordered and normalized. So I'm aware the conversations we're having are the minority. Not everyone's going to be talking about and approaching food this way. And so that's really hard to then.
One I know is a huge, massive runner, doesn't live at home, went back to their family and they made a comment around the amount of carbs they were eating after they got back from a run. So they'd just gone out, I think, I don't know, 12 to 15K. It was a long run. They went back, they had some carbohydrates, but I don't know what they ate. It was like a big bowl of porridge or something. And they were like, oh, God, you're having that. Should you not be having eggs? And they made that comment. And I think there's also this whole issue, isn't there, around like cultural, family, society, like opinions onto you, where like you're trying to be the minority and take your advice and go through it, but you're also facing against all of these like issues. How do you deal with that, like all of
It's
these
like
comments?
it's
Because
subtle.
at the end of the day, it's not their fault, right? They're just passing a comment. Why are you eating carbohydrates? That, oh, I wouldn't eat that big bowl of porridge. Or like someone making a comment on like, cool, you've gained a bit of weight, and it's like, yeah, I've just been battling with like endless amounts of food.
Yeah. But like even I can remember in like coming out of an eating disorder when someone would say you look well, that just automatically translated to like, yeah, I know I've gained like
Literally,
2
I
stone. Can you
remember
not?
when my
Like
brother turned, so it was
it's
after
it's
lockdown, and my
it's
brother was like, "Cool, get on, Chloe. Did he say like chunky, or I can't remember what he said, but he was like, oh, look, no, it's a good thing." And obviously, it was just like in my head of like, that is not a good thing. But he meant it as like, nah, you look better.
yeah. And I think it's so hard to navigate this. And I very often do have kind of like firefighting conversations with clients because they're conflicted because they know what I would maybe say about the situation, or they know that what their family or friends have said isn't necessarily correct. But you can't help but feel like, again, when it's something you're feeling quite insecure about, i.e., eating more, naturally those comments are going to weigh a lot more. Like you can comment on food for me now and it will not kind of dent my skin. But honestly, if you'd asked me or said something to me 2, 3 years ago, I maybe would question, like, I'm a dietitian, should I be doing this? So I think that comes with confidence over time. But the really important thing I often get people to think about is I talk a lot about values with clients, and they very often say, like, a big fear is like, if I gain weight, these people are going to think, like, my CrossFit friends are going to think I'm no longer like fit, or they're going to like not want to hang out with me because I'm not in the same like level of running as I used to be, or whatever it might be. And I often say, like, personally, if one of my friends like ditched me because I didn't get Botox or because I put on 2, 3 kilos stone, whatever it might be, yeah, it hurts. But for me, those people don't align with my values because I value deep, meaningful connections. And I don't personally choose my friends based on what they look like or what their achievements are. And so if somebody dumped me or ditched me for that reason. They're not people I value, so why do I value their opinion? Or they're not
Yeah.
relationships I
And I
value, so
feel like
why would I value that opinion?
yeah, and,
So
I
it's like
actually did a video on
rooted
how
in
I
that.
work out my values, and I've created a document for it, so I'll leave it in the show notes. There's
Yes,
I really
do.
resonate with that because I think when as well, when someone's had like a lot of eating rules or disordered eating or whatever, there is a huge element of not really understanding yourself. And this just isn't it just? So then
It's a
when
whole
I guess
identity
when
crisis.
working with you, they're also figuring out who they are. And actually figuring out your values is one of like, I believe,
Yeah.
a fast track way of helping you figure out who you are. But there's also this whole evolution thing, isn't there? Of like, you don't want to get pushed out from the pack. So there's these right that so it's might be they might have sat for
Exactly.
2 hours working out their values and they're like, actually, yeah, that means a lot to me. But oh my God, if I'm rejected from that pack, and it's that bridging, isn't it? I guess, like you say, exposure therapy, trying to keep developing that proof bucket.
Yeah, and it also does come down to like the intrinsic and extrinsic validation and motivations for doing it. Like, are you running a marathon because you genuinely love pushing yourself, or is it for that external achievement? And that's like where the crossover between
Yeah.
like your values around health and fitness. I don't think it's very clear cut all the time, but I do think it is important to like know your values. Like you said, I often see like a bit of an identity crisis coming out because when you've spent so long in your head and made dieting and looking a certain way your whole life, there's such a huge space going against that and having to unlearn so many things. Like it naturally does bring up a whole lot of like, well, what do I do with this time now? And even I always see that after a big project. So I've just spent the last 6 months like trying to get an apartment I bought finished. And now I'm in it. I'm
Yeah.
like, what did I used to do with like time? And there has I genuinely like I remember saying to friends and family just in the lead up to it, I was like, I'm actually worried about when I eventually cross that line because it's just a whole load of like other stuff to then figure out again because your
How I
life has been
feel
like
planning my wedding.
temporarily conditioned in
I'm
a certain
nervous,
way.
like the big
How's
crash.
wedding blues?
Like the downer that you experience after planning a wedding. And but I also resonate with that in I really went in on my HA recovery journey as we got into lockdown. So it was kind of forced on me. Suddenly my gym that I worked at and I was part of was shut. So I'm like, right, well, I might as well go for this. But it was a full identity change. I fully have made fit. I plastered fitness across my forehead. Like, if people didn't fully know that I was into fitness, I would
Mm.
make sure that they did. And then, so then when you went through that whole journey, it was a full identity crisis. And like, I'm thankful for it now because it did really open my eyes to so many other interests that I've got. And I also notice now, because I'd love to touch on sort of like, maybe not relapses, but sort of like when people are so far down the line and then they have
Mm.
little like thoughts crop up. But I notice that when I go full down
Well,
back down
yeah.
fitness, things that I loved in lockdown after that sort of like working out my values and sort of all go to the side and I go full fitness. And it's only when I pull back, these things come back in. And I'd love to chat to you. Do you experience that with clients? Like they make huge and huge, but there's still that few, like how I picture it is like a few weeds in the garden. And if you don't prune them, they'll grow into something more. How
Yeah,
do you deal with it? Or
definitely.
how would you recommend like a client would deal with that?
So I always say we need to think about your vulnerabilities. And this is not to say like I think on average they say it takes 8 years to fully recover from like an eating disorder. And I would always argue with disordered eating, like if I work with a client for 12 weeks, they're still emailing me 2 years later being like, I had this aha moment because I always say it's like an investment. It takes a lot of time, resources and energy. You don't get much payoff initially, but over time that does compound and you might not need me for that time, but there will be those aha moments. But with those aha moments come wobbles. And I always say you need to like go back to what was the function of all this? What did restriction give you? What did exercise give you? And thinking about like, are there then going to be periods in your life that is maybe going to push you to go into them a little bit more? And then, like you said, when you neglect your values, you are going to be then chasing like validation in other forms because you're not getting your purpose kind of met in other ways. So you need to be aware of like, what are my vulnerabilities. When I'm stressed, I'm less likely to have much of an appetite. So I know myself, if I then fall into that trap of under eating, is that going to trigger like those feelings of being in control? And therefore you need to make a much more conscious effort than the average Joe to be making sure like you're eating well throughout that stressful period. And that might not be forever, but it might just be like a price you have to pay temporarily for a couple of years before we really ingrain these things, because old habits die hard. And those associations you have will be there until we have way more positive associations
Yeah, which I guess
to
is that
kind
proof
of like
bucket. So what
filter
I'm
them
really
out.
hearing from you is we need to be aware of our thoughts around like disordered eating, the food rules that we have, to then be able to sort of work through them. We then also need the knowledge from you as a dietitian to be like, okay, this is what we need. But most importantly, once we've got that knowledge, we then need to face it. And we face it through exposure therapy, creating proof buckets. And one thing that can help us do that is by working out our values and still being aware of sort of like what fills us up, who we are, and going through that identity change. And I guess another thing you mentioned as well was around like the family and friends' thoughts of just being like remembering sort of why you're doing this, those intrinsic, extrinsic motivations. You mentioned earlier around like increase in food intake, probably increasing carbohydrates and eating regularly. For someone that does exercise, is there anything that you think we should know when it comes to how we should eat around exercise? Because this is also another whole like big minefield, isn't it? You see some people fasting, and that tends to have sort of gone on now, hasn't it? We sort of have established fasting training, especially for women, isn't necessarily suitable. But I still have conversations all the time around people feeling like they can't eat early in the morning, but they'll do a 6 a.m. CrossFit class. What and how should we be eating around our training?
I think you need to remember exercise is a stress on the body for everyone. And that's not to say it's a bad stress, especially when you give your body the resources that it needs to adapt from it so we can progress. Ultimately, your body is going to require additional fuel to do that. If you're someone that trains first thing in the morning, there's a bit of a suck it up buttercup kind of approach I have with this, because I don't feel like eating a bagel at 5:30 before I go for a run. I also don't feel like eating after I come back from a run, especially if it was in a high intensity one. I don't have that appetite, but I'm using my brain in that instance to go, well, it doesn't mean that my body did not need fuel. In the same way that if I have a really stressful day and I'm not thinking about food because I'm so focused on like handling whatever is on my to-do list, that does not mean I'm not hungry and my body doesn't need fuel. In fact, it probably needed more, but there's more of like preoccupation with obviously what we're having to deal with. So it is, I think, something that we just have to accept. I talk a lot about resistance to the plan with clients, and I'm like, the more you resist it, the longer this is going to go on. Acceptance does not mean you have to like something. It's just a respect for reality. You might not like having the banana before you go to your CrossFit class at 5 a.m., but your body is going to thank you for doing that. And you not doing it is more likely to drive your body going against you. Like fasted training, the ironic thing is it was promoted for like weight loss, and we typically see there are no differences in studies between people who train in a fasted state versus a fueled state. And there's a lot of conversation around the fact that if you fuel your body more, you're going to be able to push to higher intensities. You're going to be able to get those better adaptations. You're going to be reducing cortisol, which is going to be in favor of maybe body composition goals for some people. So it's, yeah, like there's just no
I
getting
love it
around we
because
need
I
food.
spoke to Dr. Nikki. I spoke to Dr. Nikki and she said similar. She was like, I know people aren't hungry, but like you just do it. And I think there's so many people that I've spoken to as well that have been like, oh, I don't really feel hungry, or like when first thing in the morning, and I've never known what to say to them. But I think I might use your phrase. Suck it up, buttercup. So what about,
No,
I
I'm
love it.
always
Yeah,
compassionate.
of
I
course.
validate. I'm like, shit, validate it. Here's the evidence. How can we just make one or two tiny tweaks? Like if a client's not ready to have a full blown bar before a session,
Okay.
can you have like a bite of a banana this week? Can you have a sip of a glass of juice? Can we really make sure like I'm not here to tell somebody how they should eat, because I want to base that off the feedback of their body. I can give you what is maybe advisable, but if we come down the line and figure out that doesn't work for you in your lifestyle, that's not right or wrong. That's fine. Let's just make tweaks that support that. But when you're in those early stages of coming out of underfueling, your hormones are really sensitive to that stuff. So it is a temporary suck it up until we get out the other side. And once we've neutralized the noise around food in your head, then we can come in with the preferences. Then we can start like tweaking things. But in those early phases, we can't really trust the difference in your head and your body at that time because it's too much made up of like the judgments and the fears. So we have to have more of
Yeah.
like a kind of stricter protocol. I always say it's
Okay.
like
Yeah. No.
scaffolding that will then strip back,
And what
but
about
you've
after
kind of got
training?
to regulate things first. You should be ideally eating in kind of like half an hour to an hour afterwards, especially if you've been quite underfueled or you've trained first thing in the day because you don't have any reserves to be supporting the adaptations afterwards. And afterwards, we want to get some protein, but don't go overboard on the protein. We're looking at 20 to 30 grams to maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So that's the process where muscle can be rebuilt. But you also want to have carbohydrates in there. And in the first 2 hours after a session, glycogen replenishment occurs at like 1.5 times the normal rate. So really important that we're getting in some carbs there to help with that replenishment. And that's also really important for muscle building too. So we want to be getting carbs, protein, and then re-nourishing a little bit with some fats and some
Okay.
fiber
Amazing. Thank you so
post
much.
workout.
I'm sure you've got such a busy day, so I'll let you go. But that has been so helpful. I feel like 18-year-old me that was going through all of this needs to listen to this conversation. I
Really
just think
don't.
it's so interesting. Like I say, I've only just started having these conversations again, and I feel like I could just chat to you for hours and hours and hours. But I just know this is going to help your the work that you do of merging, that dietitian medical professional with that whole like psychological support to get there. I think is absolutely incredible. So thank you on behalf of someone that has like went through HA recovery. Thank you so much, and also someone that's trained really heavily, like to be able to know that someone like yourself is out there that can help guide you if you are struggling. So yeah, this has been so insightful. So many nuggets of information. So thank you so much. I will leave like your website and your Instagram down below. Is there anything else that you wanted me to sort of shout out about? You mentioned your course. Did you want me to?
Yeah, so I do have an online program designed to support women to get their periods back through exactly what we spoke about. Like, most people know what they need to do to get their periods back, but it's the relationship with food piece, relationship with exercise that is stopping that. So the whole course is designed to support women to repair, rebuild that relationship with food. There's a whole module on the values, on body image, on fueling your sports performance, and also then deconstructing like why we got here, what these behaviors kind of served, and how we can build different coping mechanisms. So you can change that and get your period back as a
Yeah.
side effect and hopefully
Amazing.
never
Thank you so much.
face
I'll make
using
sure
it
I leave
again.
the link down below. But again, thank you so much. This has been so,
Thank
so
you.
insightful.
My pleasure. Thank you.